The first step is to paint the sky. In order to do that, I mix cobalt blue with a bit of lavender and quinacridone rose. The sky is painted pretty pale, and I leave a few gaps in between to denote the clouds in the sky. A few grey bits to show a few dark clouds in the sky. Again, I'm making sure that the sky is pretty pale and it doesn't read too dark. Just take a bit of clean water and make sure the edges are smooth. A bit of burnt sienna is added to the same mix to make the mix much warmer. I try to make sure that I leave space for the vehicles that I have put in, and so that I don't paint over them. The warm burnt sienna is reading pretty well compared to the backdrop. There's very little water in the brush, and as you can see that it's creating kind of a rough edge, which is actually what I'm after at this moment. Next, I add a bit of Viridian to the mix and come up with a pretty warmish green. This mix is used to paint in the grass alongside the road. Again, I drag the brush across the paper to achieve those white spots in the paper. You cannot have a lot of water in the brush. I try to merge the burnt sienna and the grass together and make sure that the edges are clean. And we move on to the other side of the road. As you can see, the paper is pretty dry, and because of that I'm achieving a few white spots or sparkles here and there. Now I'm mixing a bit of grey to paint the road. So it's a very pale mix. I'm making sure that the road is tonally lighter compared to the sides of the road. As you can see, the grass is reading much darker in tone compared to the road. Next, I mix a bit of cobalt blue and Viridian to come up with a cool mix for the ranges in the background. And I'm using a synthetic brush to slowly lay in the ranges in the background. As you can see, the color is pretty cool and it's not tonally darker as well. It's something that we would call as the middle tone. Next, I come up with a tonally darker mix to paint the shadows in the mountain. The blue that we used before is still wet or damp, so I make sure that I paint the shadows before it completely dries off. As you can see, I'm achieving a softer edge. Next, I come up with a pretty darker green mix to paint the trees in the background. As you can see, I have put some masking tape on the paper. I have done this to ensure that I get a clean, straight edge in the background. I'm adding a bit of blue and a few highlights here and there. And now it's the time to remove the masking tape to reveal the straight edge. Yep, that looks pretty neat. I take a bit of more green and I'm planning to add a few trees just in front of the ones that we have painted already. So I use the same mix to paint the trees as well. I do this carefully in order to achieve the shape of a tree. The trunk of the tree, it's a bit too broad, so I remove part of it with my finger. And a few more trees in the background. And the shadow for the tree. And a few more bits and pieces here and there. So the next step is to paint the large tree on the left. So this needs to be tonally darker than the rest of the trees that I have painted here. Unless this tree is tonally darker than the rest, I won't get the illusion of depth, or rather the distance between these trees. So as you can see, I'm making sure that this is tonally darker and reads much nearer than the other trees. Few dark lines to denote branches. So I'm not happy with the shape of the tree, so I'm using a different brush, a pretty old mop brush, to get an illusion of leaves on the tree. And I use my Swiss Army knife to remove a bit of paint and create an illusion of light on the branches. And the same dark green will be used to paint the shadows under the tree as well. And I continue the shadows on the other side of the road as well. Then I come up with a much cooler mix by using a bit of blue into the green that I have already used before to come up with a color to paint the shadows on top of the road. As you can see, I'm trying to continue the line, or rather the shadow on top of the grass, into the street. The paper is pretty dry, so I'm achieving kind of a rather rough lines on the street, which reads quite well as shadows. Again, I make sure that the lines match with the shadows that are already on the grass. Now is the time to put in the electric pole. If you remember the reference photo, it's not perfectly vertical. So I tried to get a bit of an angle. Yep, that's pretty good. And I put in the next one as well, which is closer to the first one. And the third one, which would be shorter and comparatively closer than that. And a few more afterwards. Then I add a bit of bits and pieces on top of the electric pole. I'm not going to paint any electric wires or such because the pole is pretty far away and it'll be a bit difficult to put in any wire. Next, I add a few lines to create an illusion of a fence so that the right hand side of the painting somewhat balances with the rest of the painting. Yep, those lines create an illusion of a fence. Yeah, that needs to be a bit thicker. And I put in the bits and pieces on top of the electric pole, and we are almost done. I come up with a dark mix to paint the windscreen and the tires of the car. As you can see, the car is already reading quite well against the dark tree. So this windscreen would make it even better. Just a neat stroke for the windscreen and two tires and the shadow underneath the car. And I do the same for the second car as well. It's time to add a few more details to finish off the painting. And I take off the tape now to reveal the clean white edges. Oops, that did come off pretty well. As you can see, the clean white edge around the painting makes it look much better. There you go. I'm pretty happy with it.